There was some weekend fun in the sun in College Station. All that and more on this episode of the Locked On Aggies podcast.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Aggies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Joey Ikes. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. And I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right candidates to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And I am ecstatic today to be joined by John Garcia, who is the recruiting aficionado at Sports Illustrated. John, thank you so much for joining us. A lot to talk about this week, huh?
Yeah, great timing to talk Aggies. It's taken a little bit of time here, but this class is red hot right now, finally, and you could kind of see this thing just staying on this wavelength for quite some time. That's what we saw around this time last year, and obviously we know how that one played out. Probably not going to be the same deal at the end with the number next to your name, but obviously improving the standing is the goal right now, and the Aggies are doing just that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as most of my listeners will know, this past weekend was the ever famous Texas A&M Aggies recruiting pool party and barbecue, where Coach Terry Price just throws down on the smokers for a few hours and everybody has a blast. It's a huge event every year. And every year there's a few guys who make commitments at this event and some other guys who come into town. So just, the headliner of the event actually happens, before the party even starts. And that's Denton Ryan linebacker Anthony Hill, one of the top prospects in the state of Texas, decides to make a commitment to A&M there even before the party starts, before we get going. Talk to me a little bit about Anthony and what he's going to bring to the A&M program, and just anything you know about his recruitment so far.
Well, before we get into his game, that was not by accident, right? I mean, the timing of these commitments has become business in and of itself. So I do think that was certainly by design. And no matter how you get an Anthony Hill, it's a big deal. I mean, I think that's really where the conversation should go. This is just a complete, balanced, controlled alpha on the football field. And those are not traits we often put together, right? Usually if we're talking about those dynamic players, they're kind of loose cannons, reckless abandon for their body, all these cliches that we throw out in the evaluation business. But with Anthony, it's so much more controlled. It's so much more within his own confines that it projects a higher football IQ and really presents this 3-down ability to where he can help you on every down and distance, regardless of the situation, regardless of personnel. And it also kind of gives you the benefit of the doubt with him in that he can handle it. He can handle moving around the second level if you need him to, from classic middle linebacker to the strong side type that's going to help reroute tight ends in the passing game. Anything in that spectrum, I think Anthony can do with great success. I mean, he obviously plays at Denton Ryan, like you said, just a ton of high-level competition. So that question is well out the window if there's a counterpoint being built there. So just, again, as controlled and almost safe. Safe is like a bad word. It's like game manager for quarterbacks. But that's kind of the goal, right? You want a high-floor player who's going to make an impact, and that's exactly what Anthony Hill is. The production, the size, the speed, the athleticism, the IQ, the playmaking ability, and 3-down ability, I just think makes him one of the most complete football players, not just linebackers, in this class. So to say it's a big get would be a pretty big understatement.
Yeah, I know A&M fans, from our perspective, it's almost a big sigh of relief. This sort of high-level, 5-star, elite-level linebacker recruit has almost been our kryptonite for the last several years in recruiting. There's a couple of them every year, and we're in on them every year, and then we'll miss out and they'll go somewhere else. And so it was almost this big sigh of relief to finally land one of these guys. And a lot of the conversation in A&M circles is, look at this defensive line that we're building. Like, linebackers should be dying to play behind this defensive line. And I think Anthony Hill's commitment sort of showed that feeling is starting to permeate itself through the recruiting cycle as well. The next
100%.
guy, the next guy who committed, not sort of committed, but did commit to A&M is a lot smaller school of a prospect, but still a big time guy, and that's Shiner High School athlete. I think A&M's looking at him as a safety, I believe. Dalton Brooks. So tell me what you know about Dalton. Tell A&M fans what they can expect from him over the course of his career.
Well, he does everything for Shiner, and I think that's what makes him so intriguing, right? He's a running back, receiver, DB, linebacker at times. I'm gonna just read the stats that he tweeted about his junior season because it is. Well, I don't have it queued up. I should have played that better. But he does everything. I mean, it's really no other way to put it. You know, wherever he is on the field, he's the best player. And I think that is something that should be shown when there is a question of competition. So like you said, kind of the opposite of the Anthony Hill, where you're like, I know what I'm getting here. Maybe not the same when it comes to Dalton, but the same type of impact. You should dominate when it is lower level competition. And I think that's what we see with Brooks pretty much no matter where he's lined up. I do agree that defense is a little bit more natural for him. He's a decisive, instinctive player. So it flashes a little bit more on that side of the ball because he could read and react and go right now, as opposed to on offense where he's still great and dynamic, but there's a little bit of gather there. It has to work up just a little bit more to get to that wow level. So I do think that position projection makes a lot of sense. And I think A&M racking up future defenders makes a lot of sense. That, you know, I know there's been this worry around A&M fans because number one class last year, slow start this year. That worry should never really be on defense to me. That worry should always lie on the offensive side of the ball. Who's going to be the quarterback after Eli Holstein decommits? You know, who's going to flank him at wide receiver, you know, losing to Jonte Cook and all that kind of stuff. That's where the worry is probably warranted. But defense, and I know we'll talk about O-line, defense and O-line, there shouldn't be a whole lot of worry there from a perceptive standpoint on August 1st. I think later in the cycle, sure, maybe you get worried if you want, but there was never a doubt that A&M was going to be able to put together legitimate high-end SEC-type players that are ready to come in and compete early. And I think Dalton is as intriguing as any because there's a positionlessness, try to say that again, to him that just makes him so valuable because if it doesn't work out at safety, he can go to nickel. If it doesn't work out at nickel, he can go to running back. If it doesn't work out at running back, he could probably chip his hand at receiver. I mean, it's quite the backup plan, built-in backup plan positionally when he makes that transition to College Station. So fascinating now to see where they project him, and it'll, of course, be fascinating to follow up and see how he does as a freshman.
So I did a little bit of efforting during your answer there, and according to one of the websites out there, 1,003 yards rushing on 130 carries, so a little over 7.5 yards per carry with 10 touchdowns, 317 receiving yards and 4 more touchdowns, so a little over 1,300 total yards and 14 touchdowns, combined with I think 55 total tackles, a sack, and 2 interceptions, along with 8 passes defended as a junior at Shiner. So not too bad from Dalton Brooks, like you said, a guy who does everything. Real quick, before we get into the rest of the weekend and some more questions for John, as you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. I know I personally, at least the last 2 or 3 jobs that I have gotten through LinkedIn, through either a referral there or just applying through LinkedIn Jobs. So create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond. Over 810 million people on LinkedIn. Add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions may apply. All right, so we covered the 2 2023 commits, and there was a 2024 commit also, Dalen Evans. Maybe we'll get into him here in a moment. But one guy who came into College Station on Friday but wasn't there for the actual pool party event, is a guy who's gained a lot of steam over the course of the last couple of months, and that's quarterback Austin Novasad. He is a Baylor commit, but it seems pretty clear that the status of that commitment's a little bit in jeopardy. Tell me what you know about where his head is, where he's headed, things like that. What's the status as far as you know on Austin Novasad?
Yeah, just an interesting quarterback. Certainly the fastest rising from a recruiting standpoint, maybe in the country, right? Commits to Baylor in December, and then it's just kind of chill and quiet. Signing day goes by for the class ahead of him, and then boom, the offseason circuit gets here. Elite 11 Dallas, he rips it up. I was there. He was the most accurate quarterback there over Jackson Arnold. He actually, I don't think his accuracy gauntlet score got touched by another rising senior the rest of the camp circuit. So tangibly the most accurate camp thrower that the Elite 11 tour had. And then from that point, you just started hearing more and more about other schools being close. And then I think late spring, as everyone's going by, checking out quarterbacks, high school evaluations, etc., boom, the offers start coming in for him. And they never really slowed down. Ohio State, Notre Dame, a bunch of schools, excuse me, not Notre Dame, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, a bunch of others jumped in. Georgia was the one that I shouldn't have brought up as an offer, but there was some interest there to a degree after they lost out on Arch Manning. So he became kind of that secondary quarterback target where it's like, man, we didn't get our guy, but look at this guy. And he's warranted all of that rise. He's been committed to Baylor throughout. He took the official in June. He was just back in Waco over the weekend, but he was also at A&M, like you said, and he was at Notre Dame before that. So there was certainly still some work to be done to try to figure out just where he wants to play his college ball. And you could start to construct that argument for any one of those four schools. I mean, Ohio State is out now because they got Brock Glenn. Mm-hmm. They did satisfy their quarterback need in 23. So it's a 3-team race. Notre Dame is the last school to offer. It felt at the time like it could be too little too late, but he took the visit and he liked it. And he said they're going to stay in the mix. But I think a lot of people expect this to be a Texas battle, right? He's a Texas kid. Baylor versus A&M. A&M is where both of his parents went. His grandparents, I believe, still live in the area. There's a whole lot of personal pull for Novasad to end up in College Station, although he tells us those family members aren't necessarily pushing him because they do feel that he was a strong fit in Waco with the Baylor Bears. So I think this is a head versus heart type of decision, kind of a classic recruiting conundrum that a lot of kids go through, where they think it's settled and done, and then boom, it's not quite done just yet. And now he wants to do something soon. He checked in with me over the weekend, and that is still his plan. How soon? Not sure. Obviously, 3 trips in a 5 or 6 day span is a lot to think about when they're the 3 schools that are still very much wanting you to eventually sign your name on the dotted line. So I think he's going to take his time. I don't think any of the 3 programs are going to move on to other players in terms of saying no thanks to Novasad there in the end. So I do think he's got that luxury to maybe take a little bit more time than others do, but he does also respect his high school at Dripping Springs. They're getting going right now in fall camp, and he obviously wants this potential distraction to be behind him. But on the other side of it, it's a pretty darn big decision there at the end of the day. But, there's been a combination that, as you would expect, he's been overwhelmed. He's been confused, and he's had to redirect a few times here. But again, Baylor's had some staying power here. There's really no way to undersell that. And then A&M's got a whole lot of familiarity behind it. So you would understand that move if that were his final decision there as well. So I think the only surprise would be if he picked Notre Dame in the end. And the Irish, by the way, just offered another quarterback this weekend. So maybe that's an indicator that they expect Novasad to stay in Texas just like we do.
There you go. So we know that Novasad is sort of the guy for A&M, but this weekend, there was a pretty big surprise, or at least surprise to the general public and the general fan base.
Surprise. Behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, no matter how you look at it. Big surprise.
Yeah, so and what we're referring to is that, 5-star quarterback, one of the top couple of recruits in the entire class, Malachi Nelson out of California, who's been a USC commit since November or December of last year, I believe. Shows up in College Station for the pool party this weekend, and he was another guy who's committed to another pretty legitimate blue blood school, maybe the ultimate blue blood school in Alabama. Tony Mitchell shows up for the A&M pool party the same weekend that Alabama is having a big event as well. Excuse me. And then we saw earlier in the summer, Zachariah Branch showed up in College Station for a visit. So what does it mean in terms of, bigger picture recruiting, that A&M's getting these really high profile guys who are already committed to these other blue blood programs to come for these visits and events in spite of these earlier commitments that these guys have had?
This is the business of recruiting. I think last year taught us so much about how things can change in the recruiting game, and I think for Tony Mitchell, he was committed to Tennessee back in the day. Now he's an Alabama commitment, and that was a tough battle between A&M, Bama, and Georgia. Three SEC programs known for defense. And he was really back and forth there at the end. So you understand that there's going to be some due diligence in trying to vet whether or not he made the right decision the second time around. You think Malachi Nelson understands that things can change? I mean, he was committed to Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley. Of course, he followed him to USC because his coach basically came right to his backyard. So it kind of worked out logistically. But as a kid who was on board with Riley so early, what don't you get? You don't get that full experience. You really, there's no other coaching staff beyond a Lincoln Riley coaching staff that has gotten a whole lot of time with him. So you combine that with the need that A&M still has at the quarterback position. And I've heard other schools feeling like they could get Nelson on campus. So I think for A&M to get that visit in particular, when the dead period was going to kick right back in and everybody was going to lock in for their football seasons, I think that says a lot, because I know of at least one other SEC school that was like, we might get Malachi Nelson to come in this weekend. So I did have that on radar to a degree, just not to A&M. So I do think that there was even a victory in getting that visit that weekend in particular. So yeah, that's just the business of recruiting. A&M flipped and has had prospects flipped away from them this cycle and last, and that's just a part of it. So yeah, I don't think the days of, oh, he's committed, we can't touch him anymore. I mean, those are gone. It's a business, and it's about trying to be number one again. And if you have even the capability of being a number one class, there's going to be some flips involved. So the high moral folks who say that it's wrong or anything like that, this is not a conversation for you. This is a conversation for reality and what college football is right now. And I think there's a sense that from the kid perspective, from the prospect perspective, like, I have value, right? You don't think Malachi Nelson knows how highly he's thought of beyond USC? Of course he does. So vetting that value, I think, is something that is intriguing. And obviously, when you're coming off the number one class in the country, there is a value you have presented to a lot of big time recruits. So why wouldn't you, take a look if the stars align and you can make the trip? That's what happened. And A&M got him on campus. Not a whole lot of information since. And I don't think Malachi's the type to speak to 12 reporters now and talk about how great A&M was. But again, for him to even have taken the trip is a big deal. And I think you can apply all that same thing I just said to Zach Branch. Same kind of deal, right? West Coast kid, commits to USC, is kind of done. Didn't take a ton of visits before that. So still coveted. I mean, this might be the number one quarterback and number one receiver in the country when all is said and done. So yeah, they're still going to field some phone calls during the process. It just kind of is what it is. And I think that reemphasizes just where we're at in the I guess self-awareness that these players have going through the process. And it's something that it's only going to go in that direction. It's not going to go the other way at any point. So if you struggle with it as a college football fan, it's something you just need to get over and embrace.
Yeah, and there's only a few times in these guys' lives where they're going to be like this universally pursued and feel this much like, I guess pursue is probably the right word for it, where these many guys are calling and want, like, just want you to be part of what they're building. And you gotta take advantage of that opportunity. Because like you said, especially for a guy like Malachi, who really is essentially committed to Lincoln Riley, wherever Lincoln Riley was, he was going to commit there. Right. So it helps that it's sort of in his backyard, but other than Lincoln Riley, he hasn't had a whole lot of exposure to what the college experience or the college football landscape looks like. So an opportunity to come in and be a part of this huge visit, this huge event with all these other recruits within his class and in future classes, and even some potential future teammates within the program, that's a big deal. And I don't think anybody with any sort of common sense or logical thought about it would criticize the kid at all for taking a visit.
Before I got one more note on him. He committed to Lincoln Riley at USC before Caleb Williams transferred to
Yeah.
USC. So I think there's something to be said there. They know each other. They were both at the Elite 11 together in LA. But who's to say Caleb doesn't say, man, I love college, and now I'm going to spend the next 3 years here. That would be a situation where a Malachi Nelson says, look, that's not going to happen, but maybe it's possible.
Yeah.
Maybe Malachi is up on something like that and says, hey, that's not something that works for me in my timeline. I did a little bit of research. Our rankings are coming out at SI next week. So I'm doing some research on number one quarterbacks. No number one quarterback has sat more than a year at the school he signs with before either transferring or getting handed the keys. So in theory, with Caleb Williams, he's got to sit at least 2 years, if not more, before getting the keys. So maybe it's not something that has aligned with him, because again, that decision he made came in a month, 2.5, 3 months before Caleb Williams went through with his decision to transfer to USC, even though to some it was the expectation. So that's something to consider as well.
Awesome. So before we get into the last segment of questions I have for John, I want to talk to you guys about Bet Online. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, the NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, John, we're going to kind of zoom out a little bit and just talk about this A&M class, as a whole so far, and then sort of where we see it going over the course of the next few months between now and signing day. What do you think the upside for this class is? And are there any commitments you see coming over the course of the next couple of weeks? You mentioned with Austin Novasad about how these guys, a lot of them have respect for their schools. They want to get these commitments done and out of the way so they can really lock in for their senior football season. Tell me about any guys you can see coming over the course of the next week to 10 days or so.
Well, yeah, Novasad's certainly the first one that comes to mind, because it's just a matter of when he's going to do it. I think that he's, there's no more visits. I don't even think there's possible, visit windows for him unless he stretches it all the way to September, which really nobody sees happening. So I do think that clarity, one way or the other, for A&M will come here pretty darn soon. So I think that's certainly a name to focus on. I think TJ Shanahan's another name that I would keep, close to the vest there. Austin Westlake kid, which is, optically interesting, right? A kid in Texas's backyard, although he grew up in Florida. We all know that at this point. A&M's really, secured some momentum there. So I think, there's already some strong foundation in that offensive line class. And I think they could continue to push for more volume on the front end offensively with that position group. So I think that will be another potential big need being addressed in the near future. And then if you're an A&M fan, you're curious about wide receiver. I think that's the position where you have zero commitments at the position right now, and you're wondering just who's going to kickstart it. Who's going to be the guy that gives us some juice and makes other guys say, hey, that kid's pretty good, and he went to A&M. I think there are a couple of decisions coming up. Shelton Sampson from Louisiana, I think he's got A&M in his final group. He's committing here in the next week or two. There's a couple others that are probably rounding third in their recruitment, looking to make a decision again sometime this month before their high school football senior season kicks off. So I think wide receiver is another position where I'd keep an interesting eye on, because that's one that optically I think is one to worry about, not just now, but throughout the entire course of the 2023 cycle.
Awesome. And one guy who showed up in College Station this weekend that was interesting to me, as we zoom out a little bit more big picture on the A&M class, is Johnny Bowen showed back up in College Station after decommitting from A&M earlier in the spring or early summer. And sort of, that's always interesting to me when a guy decommits. You sort of think, they always say, I always have love for this school, where
right.
The relationship's not broken. But once you decommit, you sort of assume like, okay, that school's kind of out, or they would still stay. They would stay committed until they knew for sure. But Johnny Bowen showed back up. Tell me a little bit about what that might mean. Anything you might know about that situation.
When a recruit decommits, and this is 12 years of doing this, when a recruit decommits, like you said, you say the right things always, but that school's never in it, right?
Yeah.
It's like 99% of the time that school is all the way out. And oftentimes you've already got the next school in mind, right? Those are the flips that we were talking about earlier. But I think when a kid decommits and starts taking visits and continue to consider the school he decommitted from, it's a sign of elite level recruiting. I know last year flipped everybody's script in terms of viewing A&M as one of those kind of schools, but I think this is another way to do that. You have to have this, not robotic, but you have to have this procedural kind of mind to recruit these people, regardless of the status that they put on Twitter and regardless of who's trending for them and any of that stuff. So in that regard, from an organizational standpoint, like you said, zooming out, yeah, Bowen's a guy that should continue to be recruited because they like him. He's high on the board. So you just continue to recruit that guy, even though, again, optically, social media, story-wise, all that, crystal balls, all that fun stuff, will say, hell no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You have to look at it from that high level. And I think the programs that do that, you know them, right? It's A&M, it's Georgia, it's Bama. Ohio State has done it. I've seen in the past. Those are the blue bloods in recruiting. Those are the best programs that do this. So I think it's another, kind of mini indicator of, hey, this is big boy recruiting. Even kids who decommit are still on the table for a school like Texas A&M. It's a great sign. It's a tough road, but it's a great sign because you're obviously not going to get all those guys, but it
Right.
does happen every now and then.
Absolutely. Thank you, John, so much for joining us. Tell our listeners where they can find your writing, where they can follow you on social media, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. si.com/college, the easiest way to find us, or social media. Just my name, John Garcia _JR, or at SI All American on all social platforms.
Awesome. Again, John, thank you so much for joining us. You can find me on Twitter at Joey Ikes, and you can read my writing about all things Texas A&M at aggieswire.usatoday.com. You can follow the show at Locked On Aggies, and please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, and check out our YouTube channel, Locked On Aggies, as well. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all the YouTube things, and get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Every day, host Chris Gordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. I know John makes some appearances over there with Chris as well. Get a little bigger picture, SEC picture of recruiting. Make Locked On SEC your second listen. That's Locked On SEC.